Welcome to today's webinar. We're so glad that you could join us for the Extraordinary Leader course preview. I am Brianne O'Corin. I'm the manager of digital marketing at Zenger Folkman, and I'm also the host of Zenger Folkman's podcast, The 90th Percentile, an unconventional leadership podcast. So here is my shameless plug. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, that you do so. Jack, Joe, and I have a great time each week discussing different leadership traits and trends and things that we see with some of our expert friends. So go do that. Joining us and leading the discussion today is Jack Zenger and Joe Folkman. Now in our chat box, we're going to have our Regional Vice President of Sales, Jill Mancini. She is going to be answering in and all questions. Jill, do you have any other instructions for our participants today?
Just that I look forward to hearing what you have to say. So thank you for joining us today.
Yes. Now, before we launch into the course preview, I wanted to briefly explain a little bit about Zenger Folkman for those who aren't familiar with us and some of the research that went into building this extraordinary development experience. There is a definite art to great leadership, and instead of relying on observational theories or our personal experiences, at Zenger Folkman, we are dedicated to leading with the data and looking at the data and using that in all of our programs. Now, it's because of our dedication to bringing science to the art of leadership that our main focus is helping leaders discover and develop their strengths. And that's what we'll be talking about a little bit more today with Jack and Joe. We spent many years doing this. We've seen people change and become extraordinary leaders. We know that anybody can with the right approach. So without further ado, I will turn the time over to Jack Zenger to get us started.
Thanks, Bree. We'd like to begin by having you participate in a little poll. You see up on the screen a question about what accounts for your organization's success. Is it its technology? Is it its strategy and business model? Or is it the influence of your leaders? So if you wouldn't mind, please weigh in on your answer to this question. What accounts for your organization's success?
You know, Jack, I used to have these partners who were strategy consultants, and they'd always say, if you have a really good strategy, you can have monkeys leading the business, and you'll get results. We'll see how people agree. Well, and today, technology is such a, if you have the latest, greatest technology, a lot of people think, well, that's all you need. So
okay, let's show the results of this poll as soon as we can, and let people see. Okay, so one or two people maybe think that it comes from technology. Maybe a smaller number, about 5% think it comes from better strategy. But overwhelmingly, it sounds like the majority of you feel that it's some combination of either it's strongly influenced by the quality of leaders or it's directly linked to the quality of leaders. Sounds like, Joe, we're going to have a friendly and a supportive group of participants on today's webinar. So that's good news.
Evidently, we have like-minded people with us today.
Yeah, show them our results.
One of the things we wanted to do is look at data during the pandemic. And this is data we collected from March 2020 to the end of 2021. And a lot of people, that pandemic was really terrible. It was really hard on businesses. It was difficult. It was frustrating. There was an anticipation that leadership might decline during the pandemic. Well, we actually found that it actually improved. It was up and employee engagement was up. But I wanted to show some data from the pandemic just to show you the effect of great leadership. So in this first graph, we're looking at the overall leadership effectiveness of a leader. And we're looking at employee engagement, how satisfied people are, how engaged they are in their work. These are your direct reports. And so as you see there, if you're a leader at the bottom 10%, the engagement level of those people is at the 24th percentile. If you're a leader in the top 10%, the engagement is the 81st percentile. It looks like people that were discouraged and really frustrated during the pandemic were those who worked for bad bosses. And when you think about this next graph, we're showing you the percentage of people that think about quitting. And again, at the end of the pandemic, we saw the big quit. Well, guess who left their leaders? The leaders who were poor, because poor leaders had about 49% of their employees who were thinking about quitting. Great leaders had only about 12%. Now, this next graph shows you the what we call discretionary effort. That's the percentage of people that are willing to go the extra mile. Some people, when they come to work, they want to do the minimum amount of work possible to keep their job, but really engaged employees and people that really love their work, they want to do everything possible to achieve results. They give 100% effort. And you can see that the worst leaders have only 18% of their employees that are going to give discretionary effort, but the top 10% have 69%. There is a connection between the effectiveness of a leader and some outcomes. But what I really want you to pay attention to in these three graphs is the difference between good leaders and great leaders. There's a huge difference.
Okay, so the message that we'd like to leave with you today is that we're convinced that today's workforce really wants to work for an excellent leader. In fact, we believe everyone deserves, when they come to work for a really good leader. The second thing we want to convey to you today is that better leaders produce better results. And thirdly, how does a leader know if she or he is a good leader? It rests on some assessment that gives them a better insight into their effectiveness. The Zenger Folkman organization has a proven process that's been tried, tested over the last decade or more, that shows how leaders can be developed that become more extraordinary in their daily leadership practices. Maybe a word or two about how we came to the current 360-degree feedback instrument and the process that we use, how we got here. We don't think any assessment will do. We have data on 150,000 leaders globally, with assessments from 1.5 million evaluators. We were able to test over 2,000 items using 44 kind of unique assessment instruments. From that test of those 2,000 items, we were looking for those that separated most effectively the bottom 10% from the average or the very top leaders. And we were seeing which one had the most differentiating power. And we selected some 55 or so of those items and found that they were indeed clustered into 19 different competencies. Those competencies were the ones that then separated the best from the rest. Now, the idea of leadership for many people is kind of vague and abstract. And so we found that maybe putting it in more palpable, concrete terms would be helpful. And the model that we came to was a familiar object to most of us, and that is a classic tent. And the classic tent has at the center a post, a pillar that we call character. It's honesty and integrity. Every leadership study that we've seen identifies that as being a central pillar of effective leadership. Then on the four corners were things like personal capabilities, and you see those listed: technical and professional acumen, solving problems, and so forth. Another pillar was a focus on results. Good leaders, at the end of the day, produce good results. They drive for results, they set stretch goals, they take initiative, and so forth. The third pillar is a leading change. It is the third corner of this tent. This means ability to develop strategic perspective and have a strong customer and external focus. And finally, the way all this happens is through the leader's effectiveness at working with people. And we've listed there those competencies that fall into that cluster. We would emphasize that these were not just our philosophical ideas. These were not just our beliefs about what made good leadership. These were empirical. These were derived from very careful statistical analysis. Our contention is that the effectiveness of a leader is very much based upon the size of the volume of space under the tent. If one pole is missing, obviously the tent diminishes. If all the poles are short, people aren't very effective at these things. Obviously, they're not as effective as of a leader. So this is the important message that we want to leave with you, is that these tent poles really create important results. And Joe, talk about what those results are.
Jack mentioned that this idea that better leaders equals better results. And we love this study we did with mortgage bank offices that were scattered all over the US. And what we looked at was the effectiveness of the leaders in the mortgage bank offices. Now, we found that the least effective leaders, bottom 10%, lost money. The good leaders made some money, and people were satisfied with that until they saw the great leaders, the best leaders. And there was a correlation between the effectiveness of a leader and the profitability of a bank. And again, one of the things that we know is there's a connection between great results and great leaders. Another study that we've done, and this is from 100,000 leaders, we looked at leadership effectiveness and employee engagement. And here you look at 20 levels of leadership effectiveness from the 5th to the 100th percentile. And as you can see there, poor leaders created disengagement. Good leaders got adequate engagement, but the best leaders had amazing levels of engagement. So the better the leaders, the better the engagement of employees, which affects a lot of things in terms of the ability to get things done, retention, and everything else. In fact, we found that great leaders had 25% less turnover, 40% higher satisfaction with customers, and 2 times the discretionary effort. So great leaders mean great results.
So now we come to the question of, how do we help people improve their performance? For many people, this means fixing their weaknesses, finding out, what am I bad at? How do I get better at it? And strangely enough, for a moment, we're going to say, that's a really good idea, but it's only a good idea for 20% of the people. There are 20% of the leaders that we assess who have some score on their effectiveness on those 19 differentiating competencies. That's at the bottom 10, in the bottom 10 percentile. And for those people, that's a signal of a potential fatal flaw. For those people, we would strongly advise, find out what it is and fix it. But for the great majority of people, that is not the right answer. For the other 80%, the secret that we found from analyzing our data was, it is the possession of strengths that makes the big difference. It's having a handful of signature strengths that really makes a leader excel. And so, Joe, show us the data.
Well, and this insight here, Jack, that I really love, in fact, it's my favorite insight. You don't need to be perfect to be an extraordinary leader. The idea that a leader could be perfect is the belief that there's unicorns in the world. They're not. There's no perfect leaders. They're not perfect. But what happens is they stand out on a few strengths. So Jack and I did this research, and when we first did it, we were amazed at what we found. What we were looking for was the impact of a strength, and we defined a strength as a competency at the 90th percentile. So something you were really good at. Now, we measured people on 19 competencies, and if you weren't really good at, you weren't great at any one of those, your average effectiveness, the average effectiveness of leaders who without any strengths is the 34th percentile. They're in the bottom third. So the question is, what happens if people do one thing well? They have one profound strength. Well, we measured people on 19 things, and you think, gosh, if you were really good at one, the average effectiveness is going to go up a little bit. And when I ask people how much, the mathematics, the engineers, they say, well, it'd go up 1/19th, right? I mean, because you measured people on 19 things, you're really good at one, it'd go up 1/19th, which is not very much. But it turns out if you do one thing well, your average effectiveness increases from the 34th percentile to the 64th percentile. Having one strength almost doubles the overall perceived effectiveness of a leader. And having three strengths moves you into the top 20% of leaders, five strengths into the top 10% of leaders. This idea of strengths really made a difference for Jack and I. When we first discovered this, I'd spent most of my time having people focus on what's wrong with you, figure out your weakness, and everybody work on their weaknesses. Well, it was true for some people. Some people had, like Jack said, fatal flaws, but only 20%. Most people didn't have anything terribly wrong, but they still worked on their weakness, as opposed to working on something they could build into a profound strength, something they could stand out on and accentuate their effectiveness, and really made a difference in the work that they were doing. So we moved towards doing that. And I think that was been an important part of what we do.
So to get where you want to go, you need to have a good plan and know where you are. I described to you earlier the 360-degree instrument and how we came to develop that. I now want to talk with you about what we've done to make this even better. We did a series of things. We began by interviewing many participants, focus groups with people who had been through this process, asking them what did they find most valuable, what suggestions did they have about what would make it even more effective as a developmental process for them. Secondly, we gathered data from coaches. Now we have some people who are in our coaching network. We went to them, but we also went to the coaches who work inside our client organizations and asked them, what's been your experience? What have you found that would help this to be clearer, better, more impactful, help your clients to develop stronger leadership habits? We then turn to our facilitators. Again, we have a network of wonderful facilitators. We ask them, as you work with groups of leaders going through this process, what do you hear? What do you find? What are your suggestions? We went to our clients' facilitators as well, because there are some very, very effective client facilitators who on a weekly basis are conducting sessions about this. And finally, we turned to our colleagues in the profession. We looked at what's being written, what's being presented at the latest conferences. We've tried to then pull all of this data together over the past year and a half to create what is now, we will call our 360 2.0 version, the second edition of the Extraordinary Leader process. And Joe, talk about the new feedback report.
So when we started to build the feedback report, we wanted to put the two most important pieces up front. First, how am I doing as a leader? And second, how engaged are my direct reports? So we rearranged the feedback report so that we showed the overall leadership effectiveness score, which is the average of all the items in the survey. And then we showed the employee engagement score for how engaged my direct reports are. Another concern that people had about our displays was they said, you know, it's hard to tell if you have a profound strength, and it's really difficult to tell if something is a fatal flaw or it's something that could be a fatal flaw. So we started to change the graphs to display colors. And you can see that the total scores here are both blue. That means they're just slightly below the 75th percentile. A third thing that we did is that we've been measuring employee engagement all the time we've been in business with these 5 items. They're really great items. But lately we've been thinking, you know, there's another question we need to add to the engagement index, and that's item 66. You can see it's that bottom item there. Each person is treated with dignity and respect. That's so important today, and we wanted to measure that and make that part of that employee engagement index. So we added 1 item to the index. So in addition to this, as you can see the tent poles, and Jack's talked about them, you can really see the colors there. The blue bars are those that are above the 75th percentile. The dark blue bar is slightly below the 75th percentile. The gray bar is below that. So you can see the colors of the really represent and help people understand how they're doing on that 360 and where their score falls. Now, we list the 19 competencies, and it's interesting because we created a new chart here that shows you how you compare to the norms, where we compare you to 150,000 global leaders. But you can see those bars in green, and those are profound strengths. Those are competencies where you scored at or above the 90th percentile. You can see the yellow right down at the bottom. That's the lowest rated competency, and it's one where it's a bit of a red flag, where we're thinking that could be a fatal flaw. Now, we're not sure it is, because you have to check 3 things to determine if it's a fatal flaw, but it's certainly a marker for this might be a fatal flaw. You can see our norms there. The sorting here is a little different because things are sorted relative to the norms here. So the order doesn't follow the mean scores, it follows the distance between the 90th percentile and your score. Now, we also had an interesting page where we pulled everything together so that people could determine what competency to work on. And Jack's going to talk about the CPO model. But one of the things that we think is important is competence. And that's the center bars. That's the bar charts there. That shows you your competence level. But these are sorted by importance. And you can see the importance ranking over to the right. Each person is asked to select the 4 competencies that, if done well, would make the biggest difference in a leader's ability to be successful in their current job. And you can see these are sorted by importance. One change we made here in how we calculate things is we included the self-importance ranking in the importance ranking here, because we feel like, unlike your effectiveness, people had a good sense of what they felt was important. So we included their importance ranking in the total. The last thing we have is this new column, LP. LP stands for leadership passions. We think that an important part of improving something is that you need to have some energy around it. You need to have some desire to do something better. To build a profound strength, it takes passion. So in the self-assessment, we actually ask people to indicate the 6 competencies where they feel the most passion and the most energy to improve. Now, this gives us a really nice formula to put these things together. In the previous version, this was on 3 separate pages, and people had to figure out the passion separately. So this really brings everything together on one page and makes it easy for you to kind of select one competency to work on. We also show you the gaps between what you think you do well and what other people think you do well. The green bars represent those where you underrate your effectiveness. The yellow bars represent areas that you might see or overrate your effectiveness. And that might be a blind spot for you. And so we help people recognize those blind spots. Now, that's just part of what the new report looks like. It's colorful, it's easy to read, and everybody we put through the pre-tests on this have loved it and have found it much easier to kind of navigate their way through the analysis.
All right, so Joe has already kind of introduced this idea. So when a person gets their report, what do they work on? What competence should they select as their primary target? And we're proposing three points of view. First of all, what are you good at? Again, for those who are in that 80% where they're going to work on one of their strengths, what are you currently getting a B+ on that you could get an A on? But knowing where your strengths are is the first step. The second one is, what does the organization really need from me? What would my boss say? What would my colleagues say? What do I know in my heart of hearts would make the biggest contribution? And finally, where is my energy? Where's my enthusiasm? Where's my passion? And we believe that it is in that convergence of competence, organizational need, and passion that people find the ideal place to focus their attention on their development. We think this is a very valuable notion. Now, how do you go about doing that? We'd like to introduce you to the concept of strength builders. We all know and have heard about tennis players who are wanting to become better at their backhand. So what do I do if I'm a tennis player and I want to build a better backhand? Well, I can go out and hit more tennis balls in a ball machine. I can practice with other people. Or what we find is that many times the tennis player will do something different. He or she will do aerobic exercises. They'll do weightlifting. They'll do strength training. They'll do yoga. They'll do bicycling, because those things have been shown to kind of create the physical ability and the coordination that leads to a better performance. That's referred to as cross-training in the world of athletics. Now let's think about this as it applies to the world of business. A person wants to become better at, say, strategic thinking. What can he or she do? Well, they can read more books, they can go to a class, a seminar, they can take a course, they can read journals, they can have conferences with people in the organization that they think are really good at this. But what we found also is that there are some behaviors that are statistically significantly correlated with those people who are good at strategic thinking. And those skills were being a more powerful communicator, being open to innovation, being very customer focused, going out and visiting customers, seeing how they use my product and my services, being willing to kind of set stretch goals and set higher targets. These were specific behaviors that appeared to have the ability to strengthen a person's ability to think strategically. So this notion that is a very powerful one, we have developed a strength builder development guide pertaining to every one of those 19 differentiating competencies. So that if one of your participants chooses to work on whatever it is, developing strategic perspective, solving problems, being more innovative, taking initiative, whatever it is, we have a guide for them to use, which gives them some concrete, specific ideas, suggestions about what they can do to get better at this skill. Joe?
We used to call this the Competency Companion Development Guide, and we wanted to change it to something that really fit us better. And so now we're not calling it Competency Companions, we're calling it Strength Builders, because that's the object. That's really what they do. They build strengths for people. Well, another thing that we did in our development of the new version is that we took those strength builders, and we used to have, we used to have up to 14 companion behaviors. What we did is we simplified that guide. So we have 3 to 6 strength builders now. And that makes it a lot easier for people to consume, but we got the top ones, the ones that were most significant. Another thing we tried to do was simplify and really add some depth to our development plans. Now, we had an okay development plan, but we wanted a great development plan. And so what we did is we tried to drill down. We know that people change when they move from a general idea for change to some specific actions that will help them to change. And so one of the things we've done is really taken our development plan and put more meat in it and ask people to drill down and to get into more detail about what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, who they're going to ask for help, and how. And we think this is going to make a big difference in your ability to be successful in this course and have people move from good to great. The interesting research that we have on this course is that we believe it is the best solution for you in an organization to build great leadership. Now, here's our data. So this is a study of 3,050 leaders. Now, we didn't find that everybody had a significant improvement. We did find that the majority of leaders significantly improved going through the Extraordinary Leader Development Experience. So these are people that went through a pre-test, they went through the 360 training, they went through and did that. And then 18 to 24 months later, they got a post-test, which is the same survey again, and we compared the pre-test against the post-test. We found that leaders who with fatal flaws went from the 18th percentile to the 46th percentile. They made a dramatic change. They went from bad to good. That's some real good progress. And then for leaders who had strengths, that they didn't have fatal flaws, we found that those leaders started off at the 55th percentile, just 5% percentile points above average, but they moved to the top quartile, the 75th percentile. We have evidence to show that you can take good leaders and make great leaders. The secret, develop strengths. The way you do that is using these companion behaviors, or something we call strength builders now. Some of us are having a hard time making that transition, but I'll try to do better calling them strength builders. So the inside, or the final quote here, is this quote that the greater danger for most of us lies not in setting our aim too high and falling short, but in setting our aim too low and achieving that mark. So Bree, some offers.
Yes, thank you so much, Jack and Joe, for all those great explanations about extraordinary leadership. We know it doesn't just happen, but it requires these new behaviors and mindsets. So next steps, if you are a certified facilitator or coach for Zenger Folkman, we encourage you to reach out to us to learn how you can prepare to use this remastered version of the Extraordinary Leader in your organization. And you can do that by contacting Terry Robert. Her email is right there on the screen, trobert@zengerfolkman.com. Now, we hope we've piqued your interest today. And we know that you know someone in your organization who could greatly benefit from knowing their strengths and understanding how to utilize them and build them in better ways. So this is our offer. We are going to have the Extraordinary Leader 360-degree assessment for one leader in your organization, plus a 90-minute coaching session, a one-on-one at no cost for a senior leader. Now, there are some stipulations that must be a director level or above for US-based organizations, and it's limited to the first 10 people who request this offer. So don't hesitate, act fast. Now, because we preach constantly about the need for feedback, and that feedback is a gift. We would like to receive some from you about how this session went today and get your feedback. So there will be an exit survey that will pop up after we conclude this webinar, and that it's also a great opportunity for you to indicate your interest in this offer that I just talked about. So you can see that on the screen, there's a bit.ly link that you can open another browser, or in the chat box, you can find that link there as well. So you can just click on it and fill out that survey. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us today for this product preview.